now you're in an entire room where you're going to be hard pressed to shock somebody with your stories. And when people are struggling, they feel that their stories are unique and their experiences are unique and their trauma is unique. And it's a harsh reality to find out it's not. You're not unique.
Welcome to Ultrahabits. Here, we go under the hood with our guests to unpack the minutiae and to understand what processes and systems they engage or research that result in ultra-enhanced living.
Howdy, folks. It is RJ Singh here at Ultrahabits, and thank you for joining us on another week where we are unpacking some magic. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll notice I'm super laid back and casual. It's because I am not working this week. I'm in my home office. However, the Ultra Habits show must go on. And today I'm talking to Joshua Frank, better known as JT. We have so much in common. JT has his own podcast called The Consequences of Habits, where he unpacks his guests' habits and how it impacts their community and environment. Now, JT is also in recovery. He is a recovering alcoholic, and we have so much to talk about. We wanted the opportunity to bring it to both of our communities. Now, the interesting thing about this conversation is that JT's life looked very differently to mine on the outside. JT was in the Air Force, retired military, still serving the community while he was actively drinking. And for all intensive purposes, it looked like he really had his shit together. And when you looked at my life, while I was drinking and using, I was a complete mess. As many of you know, in and out of institutions, jails, prisons, all kinds of different things. But the whole thing around addiction, as most of us know that have suffered from it, is we may look and present ourselves to a certain way to the world, but ultimately we all feel the same. And it's when we really move beyond the exterior and the superficial and we connect on a deeper level that we start to recover from the insidiousness of drugs or alcohol or whatever your poison may be. And JT, like myself, came to find that whilst habits played a negative role in his life while he was drinking, it also became the steps towards his new life in embracing better, more optimal habits, and ultimately has led him to a path of freedom and discipline and happiness. And that's what we're on the show talking about today. It's about habits, it's about recovery, it's about everything in between. I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation. It's different than most of the interviews I do, as we are having a conversation. There's Q&A on both sides. So I really do hope you enjoy the format. We decided to try something a bit new. Anyways, as Christmas comes, think about, reflect on the year, just keep safe, don't get too shit-faced, stay healthy, reflect, renew, and think about what you're going to be doing when you come out the gates on the other side in the new year. Anyways, I leave you in the capable hands of JT as well as myself. Enjoy the show. Peace out, y'all. I've been thinking a lot about consequences when it relates and how it relates to habits. And over the last few weeks, I've realized that people that are good with habits and are able to kind of maintain their momentum with their habits have a very good system and way of connecting with consequences, right? Like, I think the ability to live your consequences and truly connect to your consequences help anchor yourself to the habits in the moment.
So we're going to get into our past, but do you think it was that absence of that connection or that ignorance of that connection between our habits and the consequences?
I think that personally, I lacked the roadmap, first of all, on how to successfully live. But two, I didn't have a strong sense of identity that I was moving towards that then enabled me to understand how the consequences of my bad habits were impacting that identity that I wanted to move towards, right? So like they say, if you stand for nothing, you fall for everything. I probably also lacked the willpower. But again, I think that was because I didn't have a strong sense of identity or what I was working towards. What's your view on that, JT?
It's a couple of different things. One, I think, like you, had an idea of what you want to be, but that need to feel good short term was constantly compromising that. And then I'm sure if you said, hey, think about it, dummy, for more than 3 seconds, then I would have connected the dots. But I think there's a lot of times where I was just along for the ride, like where I was getting, hey, this would happen without truly going, well, it's because of this that you seem to do every single day, or maybe that's a huge part of this thing. So I mean, I'm still working through it, but I think what we're eventually getting to is the habits that bring that long-term feeling of happiness or pride or success. They don't come quick. And I wasn't willing to wait to put that time in. I wasn't in some aspects of my life, but just not some other ones. I don't know if that makes sense.
Do you think, though, is people that suffer or have suffered from addiction, that addiction has a way of superseding any plan?
Oh,
right. Like, the impulse to use, whether it be alcohol or drugs, will supersede any, motivation to move towards a higher goal. Like, if you don't have the systems in place to stay sober, everything else means nothing. And, we talk about it in recovery, right? Like the forgetfulness of the alcoholic.
Yeah.
You just forget.
You just forget it, and everyone has that clarity. I mean, I don't care how bad you are in your addiction, and we can get into that as well on how everyone's journey. I just had this conversation with somebody this morning where some people it's a complete rock bottom, and other people it's just different, But everyone has those moments of clarity where you go, yeah, this is what I should do, or this is the path forward. But I guess that's what addiction is. It's derailed by that need to scratch that itch that never seems to go away.
It's interesting, and maybe you can take us into your past, because I've always been interested with people that have been able to compartmentalize their addiction. So they were successful in other areas of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
I could never really do that. How did you manage that piece? Like, how did you keep the lid on the beast whilst in other areas you might have been thriving, or maybe you were just surviving? I don't know.
It gets complicated, because I think one of the reasons I excelled in other aspects of my life was I was compensating that I was struggling over here. So to feel good about myself, or to present myself in a certain way, I did, this other part of my life, I made sure that I at least packaged this thing and I came across in a way that people, at least in my eyes, thought, they walked away going, that guy's got, excuse me, that guy's got his shit together. But, I've said this before. I've said this in a 12-step meeting where I almost felt like I was a half-assed drunk at the same time. I was envious of somebody who just hit rock bottom that couldn't balance those two things, because to me, it was like a boxer who just got knocked out, right? There was no, compared to more what I felt like I was doing, which was being murdered with a wiffle ball bat. Like it just took a really long time, and it stung on a daily basis. So, and matter of fact, the conversation I had today was, and we're going to get into what we have in common, what those comparisons are, what we have in common, and what, how our stories differ. But I had to really, the same thing that made me, in my eyes, a half-ass drunk was also the reason I didn't seek help for so long, because I could portray somebody who could do both things. Yeah.
So if you were to talk to someone that was close to you in your life when you were in active alcoholism, would they have been part of the blast radius, or were you able to keep it under wraps even from those that were really close to you?
I was able to keep it under wraps. I mean, I had my people, like, I knew the people I could truly open up to, and they were people that drank like I did. But it were the same people that, you smell your own, your own. So I would hang out with somebody and be like, all right, I know this guy. We're cut out of the same piece of wood when it comes to this. So we can have these open conversations about feeling like crap, or hiding a beer bottle, or something like that. But the other ones, no. I mean, I didn't. And blast radius for me was kind of a relative term. I didn't really. A lot of people, I'll say this, a lot of people were surprised when I said I have a problem.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And it made me question whether I did, but the further distance I got from it, the more I realized, like, yeah, 100%. I can clean up my garage and still find some empties somewhere, like stashed in a toolbox. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's not normal behavior for somebody who's got it all together. So, yeah. How about you? How did, when we talk about having these goals and wanting to be a certain way, but not being able to fulfill that, or, head in that direction, what was that for you, and how were you distracted from that? And then really, what was that thing was like, oh shit, I gotta figure something out.
Yeah. I think for me, I developed a correlation between my using drugs and early days when I was a youngster. It was like, how was I going to facilitate that drug use? So I got into making money the wrong way. But as I got older, they became intertwined. So it would be, I mean, my life could fall apart within a week. So I may be sober for like a few months, back in university, doing my undergrad degree in business, on a Monday. On a Wednesday, I get an idea to go have a beer, and I go have a beer at the pool hall. And next thing I know, someone offers me a line of Coke in the bathroom. I do the Coke, and within 24 hours, I'm back selling methamphetamine.
Wow.
It literally would move that quickly. And the university will stay, but my whole sense of identity within a 2 to 3 day period will shift. I will adopt a different set of morals. It's insane. Like, if I reflect on that, like, as soon as I go into the using mindset, I pick up a new character.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know if you can relate to that, right? And my whole goals and my whole aspirations become completely corrupt because they're aligned with the dealer, RJ, the dealer.
Well, it's got to make you question whether you know yourself, right? Because it makes you feel like, you just lack authenticity. And that's something I've dealt with. Like, I used to think that was a good attribute, to almost be like, be able to adapt to whatever scenario I was in, whatever my surroundings were. But as I continue to grow, you realize, well, that's not the way to be. I mean, the true leader has those grounded ways of doing things, and that doesn't deviate depending on whether you're around other entrepreneurs or people drinking, doing whatever it is. So I do think I definitely can relate to that. And when we talk about our different lives, I think one of those things that I was always around a structure that was just so unacceptable, whether it be the military. That I think that's one of the few things that truly kept me grounded from that. And the process of getting sober, I found myself, I can see how I could have gone a complete opposite direction, given the right circumstances, given the right surroundings. And I mean, I've somewhat seen it, start to really head in a certain path, and was almost like yanked by the back of my neck back into a different world.
Well, here's the go. Like, structurally, the military, although it's aligned with purposeful work, and you can go into the politics of it, which we won't, but structurally, it is no different to, let's say, when I was a youngster and I got caught up in a crowd of highly influential, strong males. They were just orientating me towards different outcomes, but the structure was effectively no different. So what happened was you had an addiction, but you were operating within an ecosystem where what success looked like was different. And you all strive towards what that success looked like within that structure. I had always attracted to strong males. If I looked at the thread of my criminal career and even business career, there's always been a strong male that, in a sense, has helped shape me. Mm-hmm. Right? And I could have applied that. And you and I had that conversation, like, there were moments there that I missed the boat, particularly on the US Marines when I was a 17-year-old kid. But I would have been able to apply that, and I would have taken to that structure very well. I would have probably gone into the Marines and been a pisshead, what we call an alcoholic here in Australia. But what success looked like within that structure would have orientated me towards different ideals.
Yeah, there's no difference, right? I mean, what was acceptable in the communities that you were around with strong males, that helped guide you through whatever you were doing. What was acceptable was what you were probably doing along the way, where vice versa. I've said this within the military communities, this idea of pushing down emotions, drinking your problems away, that is not serving us long term. If anything, because when we talk about identity, there's a lot of people, they put everything into that identity of their time they serve, the habits that they form, but at some point you're not around those people anymore, but those habits are still with you, and it's not acceptable. And now you're alone. You're drunk and alone, which is no way to be, right? So, yeah, I don't think there's much difference. And I think a lot of people don't like hearing the fact that when we talk about organizations, we talk about, things like the military. Anytime you're part of something that's bigger than you, like, there's a reason the Hells Angels came from the military. And even within what we're trying to do is kind of build this connection through purpose and challenge. Whether you're a criminal organization or a military or a law enforcement, whatever it is, there's not that much difference. You're part of something bigger than you. You're part of a group. It's got standards. I mean, they could be low, but they have standards. You have to be able to do these certain things. And if you excel in that, then you've just picked your poison by what group you've aligned yourself with.
100%. And even when I was in my addiction and I was allowing myself to be influenced by certain men, I remember thinking, like having explicit thoughts that I was making myself stronger and smarter and faster. And, we all want to be part of something, and many of us want to feel like we're excelling. And because that was the only form of life where success was on offer in my mind, that's where I went. And, one can argue, and I would agree, like the common sense element of, well, it's better to be part of a community that is moving towards a positive set of ideals. Ultimately, though, you have to be with yourself. And that's where that alcoholic ex-military guy winds up in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, sitting right next to a dude that's done 30 years in the penitentiary. And although from an external perspective, one may look like a war hero and the other dude might be, he might look like a piece of shit, they're both emotionally at the same place.
100%. And I think that's one of the biggest problems is that we stake our flag in this identity of whatever it is we've packaged. So I'm a military veteran. I'm a guy who did 30 years in jail. I'm a lawyer above this stuff. At the end of the day, man, this human experience doesn't give a shit what rank you were, what your sexual preference is. None of it, your tax bracket, none of these things, they don't matter because we all react the same to certain things. We pick these poisons when we've gone through trauma or, dealt with some hard things, or maybe not. Maybe it's just your personality. Maybe, your ADHD, whatever, and you just kind of tend to go towards these things. We all just pick our poison. And I'll ask you, I know for me, I found more empathy in others than I ever could have imagined by going through a 12-step program and being in rooms with people I would have never been in rooms with before.
I never realized how much I needed a community. I think, and when I got there, I got sober here in Australia, but I was lucky growing up in the US. I was exposed to AA at 16, right? In the US, we're good like that. We throw kids in AA pretty young. And
Yeah.
I knew it was successful and it would work, but I never gave it a shot because it was what it was. But when I came into the rooms this time and got sober, the group and the power of the group held me. It was like a community. And, that Johan Hari, he talks about connection being the antidote to addiction. I agree that that's a strong element of it. And that's what we get in recovery.
Yeah, you definitely, just like I said, I found I knew the people I could talk to, and these are people that were drinking. Now you're in an entire room where you're going to be hard pressed to shock somebody with your stories. And when people are struggling, they feel that their stories are unique and their experiences are unique and their trauma is unique. And it's a harsh reality to find out it's not. You're not unique. I had somebody tell me that once and I was kind of taken back by it, but there's a million of us. Some of us are active, some of them aren't, but we're not an anomaly.
Well, here's the go. And this is an important point. Talking to a newcomer 2 days ago. People that are newly sober are in love with their narrative of how fucked up and how hard it is and the why they're doing this. And they're typically heavily analytical, trying to unpack it all. And, as we say in the rooms, a garden variety drunk. Like, I think to some level, helping a newly, introduced person to sobriety realize, look, your story has different flavors, but it's all coming from the same jar, like it's not unique. We talk about that terminal uniqueness. I think you're right. I think it's that identification and like, okay, I'm in the right place and there's an answer here. It's connecting with consequences again, because you're seeing the consequences of people that have done it play out right in front of you. Yeah. Married with children, successful business, rah, 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 the list goes on, and you start to make the connections. How did you get into habits? Like, how did you start to connect to the whole piece on habits?
Oh, I got sober and I said, man, there is a lot less drama in my life. Like, my life is so much easier than it used to be. And I go, all right, well, why was that? Well, I stopped doing this one thing that was compromising me from being the person I was trying to be. What else have I got going on? What else can I start looking at and go, start connecting these things between habits and how I feel about myself. And we talk about mental health. For me, it was, how do I feel about myself? Am I real? Am I, is this part of the facade of presenting something that's not real? And I'll be honest with you, I still struggle with that. I mean, I can have a crappy day or do something that's very counterintuitive to a guy who's talked about habits all the time. And then I'll sit around and think about that. Like, I think that's part of the acceptance, right? Just knowing that, hey, well, I don't have I don't have it all figured out. But that was that was the reason I really thought about habits, because I still tried changing stuff when I was drinking every day. Like, I still meditated. I worked out a ton. I actually probably worked out more when I was drinking than I do now.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yep.
So overcompensating thing, probably.
100%. I used to take pride in it. I used to take pride in the fact that I could, drink a bottle of wine and then go run, 6 miles the next day, and I'd be miserable. But there was a pride in it's so stupid. It's ridiculous.
Charlie Engle talks about the purging.
Yeah. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was probably that was why I got into habits. It's happening in real time. It's a work in progress. But how about yourself? What was it? Let me ask you this, because
the real time one is interesting. I'll just say that, happening in real time.
I think it's more interesting because you never know exactly where it's going to go. I think one of the things about people that, to me, do have it figured out, and they post it and they present it all the time, is, to me, that puts up a wall. I don't connect with that near as much, because that's never been me. And I don't know if there ever will be me. Some people, I think, are cut out of different pieces of wood. Like Jeff Harris. Jeff Harris, he is a guy that he lives a life that it wouldn't fit in my brain. Like, those operating systems they just wouldn't work for me. To happen in real time for me, I think it makes things interesting. It helps hold me accountable. It's just as much for me as it is everybody else. But how about you? How long after sobriety, how long after becoming an entrepreneur, did this idea of discussing habits and the impact they have, how long did that take?
It never crossed my mind. Someone else called it out.
Really?
So I had been sober almost 10 years. And when I got sober, I used a lot of what I called these self-imposed crucibles, which I suppose I didn't know at the time that Marines have this thing as well, right? These
Right.
crucibles. And so my whole thing was, at any given time I was involved in a crucible that was shaping either my mind, body, or spirit, right? So I went through the MBA. I did an MBA, an executive MBA, which took 4 years. I did lots of spirituality work in different kinds of arenas within the spiritual marketplace. I embarked on ultra endurance running, and all these things were what I would call powerful external endeavors, which were stretching me, right? So that was learned from my journey of Alcoholics Anonymous. So, when I got into AA, it was probably the biggest crucible in my life, that whole process of sobriety. But what I learned on the back of that was, if you create an existential pressure, it'll pull you in the right direction. It'll pull you forward, given you're ready for it. Your systems, your habits, your mindset have to be right. I'm at a place now in my life where if I get involved in anything, there's very little possibility I won't hit the mark or move towards it successfully, not because I'm some kind of ninja badass. It's because the conditions are right within my psyche, my heart. I've got what it takes from a habits and systems perspective to move towards whatever that calling is, like a master's degree, a PhD, whatever. So 10 years into sobriety, I'm working with a coach, and she gives me lots of psychometric testing and all this kind of stuff. And basically what she uncovers is that my greatest value, the apex of everything I believe in, comes down to commitment. And when she told me that, it really hit me hard, because I had never been able to put a language to why I had such a deep sense to fulfill whatever I was doing. But it just made sense. And then behind that, she saw that my whole life, there was a deep orientation towards a deep commitment to whatever habits I was engaged in. And habits can be agnostic. And that just made sense, right? Like, as an addict, I was like a very, very committed addict. As a drug, I was extremely driven and ambitious and committed to the steps that took me to whatever that success looked like in that realm, whether it be negative or positive. And then she helped me unpack that I had so many systems and processes that were explicit within my life that I actually focused on real time. And the output was just a culmination of that. And she was like, "You're a habits person." And I was like, "No, that's too simple." Like, come on. Like, like, I was even, I'm a non-active Freemason. Part of why I loved Freemasonry was because of the ritual, right? There's a lot of ritual in there. And it just made sense. So I actually didn't, now I'd love to tell you, I kind of had this moment where I didn't, someone else actually helped me realize that this is kind of how you're operating.
So that's interesting, because I just had a conversation with somebody that was, who was an addict, is now an ultra runner.
Very common in our community.
Yeah, it's lots and lots of people. And we were discussing on how do we convince, or how do we market the fact that what made him, and it sounds like you, a good addict, and I mean that in a negative context, right? Like, but your personality traits made sure you found drugs every single day. When you, and I'm not speaking for you, I'm speaking for this guy.
Yeah, of course, no.
And are the same attributes that are making him successful just like habits, it's a double-edged sword, but in his new endeavor as in branding his story as an entrepreneur, those same things are making him successful. So how do we convince people that what they have is almost like a superpower if you can actually connect those actions with the positive emotions that come along with doing what you would consider the right thing?
I think it comes back to design. I'm looking behind you, and I know the answer, and you're asking me the question. It's that connection to the consequences. And I think, let's assume the addict has put the pipe down or the alcohol down, and now that's like compulsory, right? Like, we have to assume, for the sake of this conversation, we now have an individual that's arrived, they're newly sober, and now they're looking at the redirection of this energy. And there is a resourcefulness and a powerful energy within the addict alcoholic, which, if redirected to a passionate and purposeful endeavor, is quite the outcome of that can be quite profound. And what happened for me was the external environment started to tell me, you're really good at this. Let's just say business, right? For me, it was starting off as a sales rep. I started to get accolades, and people were telling me, my environment responding to me positively. I started to reshape my identity, and the consequences of how I was operating in, let's just say, business, the consequences were super positive. And that started to become my new how, which then started to build my why. Not the other way around, actually, for me. And that's how it is for me, actually, in general. My how creates my why. But that's what happened for me. So I would say that in Alcoholics Anonymous, you don't always have the alcoholic that is like us. Like, a lot of people, you get the lethargic ones as well, right? So it's not everyone has that energy all the time. But for that individual that has that energy, and yes, you're quite right, it's a superpower, but it needs to be tempered. And there needs to be an introduction of, spirituality, and whatever that might look like for an individual. There needs to be a tempering of the mind, body, spirit, so that you kind of don't go crazy, I think.
It becomes all consuming, especially at first. You talk about somebody new to sobriety, like that's all they want to talk about. I mean, everyone's got friends that have gotten sober, and literally that's all they want to talk about. And it became exhausting for me at some point, because, the whole point of this thing for me was to step away from this identity of a guy who, he drinks wine when he's cooking, and he drinks really good, craft beer and all that bullshit. That there's more to this than just, preaching about sobriety. It's part of it. It's been a huge thing for me. But when we talk about habits, that was just one of my habits. That, it was a huge one. And I think connecting all, like I said, when I talk about picking your poison, that everyone's got them, that the sooner we realize that, we see the similarities between the guy who can't, or a woman who can't get off their phone, because that's one I struggle with, whether it's social media, whether it's a sex addiction, whether it becomes ultra running, whether it becomes work, whatever it becomes. But having that at least emotional awareness for me of when whatever I'm doing is tapping into that same thing that alcohol was doing for me, which was usually distracting me from myself.
It's an interesting one. This ultra running, like I've been looking, I've started running again. And for the first 3 months when I moved here to Melbourne, Australia, I came to our head office. I was the first 3 months I was in the office at 6 a.m. I was leaving around 5. And for 3 months, it was just straight like this. And then I started to really become isolated in my mind. When I'm involved, it's funny for me, when work is my primary focus or any endeavor, when I'm highly cerebral, I disconnect from my body and I disconnect from others in a weird way. And the last probably month and a half, I started running and trail running. And it's an interesting thing because by kind of breaking my body a little bit, not in a negative way, but by pushing the body really hard, it forces me back into my body. And I live life through my body versus my mind. And almost immediately I've recalibrated myself, and it's affected my relationships positively, because what ends up happening is I'm living through my body and my kind of authentic self versus kind of being floating around in here, which is where my alcoholism resides. So that can quickly become lopsided though, because if I start to push myself beyond the extremes, which can become very easy to do, I'm then super tired and grumpy and, but I guess to your point, we all have to find the systems that work for us, especially as people that are in recovery. And I think to your point again, like when we first get into recovery, we're reshaping that identity. So we're all consumed with, I'm now a sober person, but okay, it's like, what are you going to do from here? So I'm interested for you, with you, like, what is when you're not traveling well and you're kind of when you're subpar, what does that look like for you? Like, how do you know you're off kilter, and how do you recalibrate?
Well, I know I'm off when I will do just about anything than sit still in my own mind. Like that's the one, like I know if I start bouncing around looking for something that will keep me from just sitting in my own thoughts, that's a clear sign like you're not in a good place. Driving for me is always an easy one too. Like how I interact with other drivers. And that's not me. I'll say this. It's how I interact with assholes on the road. Like if somebody cuts me off, if I'm in a good place, I can, they always say there's that half a second between, before you react. Well, I can find that half second where when I'm not, then it's a reflex, right? It's just this anger and that's a clear sign that I'm not happy with myself. I got to look a little deeper, figure out what the hell's going on. If I'm snapping at people at work or at home and, it might be them, but my response, part of my journey has been stoicism has helped me quite a bit. Right. So it's that philosophy. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it. And I'm not in control of that when I'm not in a good place. And then what do I do about it? I probably realize it later than I should. But once I do, breath work has been a good way. I was kind of getting away from that. I mean, physical exercise is always something. If I can just get that energy out, then there's a stillness that comes along with that that is very hard to replicate. And the easiest way I can do that is through breath work or cold exposure or something along those lines that kind of ground me. It's almost like taking the fight out of me. So those are my go-tos. Those three, I would say physical exercise is probably the best all around, because you just feel proud of yourself. You get done, you can see what you did, and you know that nobody's doing that. There's a sense of pride that goes along with that. And then breath work and cold exposure. Those are my go-tos. How about you?
I've come to appreciate more recently how important, like in recovery, we recommend, prayer and meditation. And I got into meditation a couple of years into sobriety, and I would say my physiological state wasn't quite ready for the level of meditation I was going for. And I think there's an importance, especially for highly wired people. We have a nervous system. I particularly have a nervous system, which regulating that nervous system is extremely important. And I manage that process through things like, breath work, cold therapy. I drink hot water continuously. For me, meditation has been, which I stopped for a while, particularly when I was ultra running, just because of the time, but I'm back into it. And it's much better for me when I take into account my physiological structure, and kind of, I do things that, I have a friend who's a yogi, and, he talks about it in true kind of, he does Kriya yoga, which is like Sadhguru. And he goes, the meditation's at the very end. You do you do physical movement, and all that's to get your kind of energies and your body right for the event of the meditation, because a lot of us will just move to a meditation when we're spinning around, and it's not necessarily of any value when you're all over the shop.
Right.
And I've had to learn that. So, and I'm with you too about the Stoicism. I do journal in the Stoic Journal, and I do a lot of Stoic reading. I'm into a Indian practice, which is called Vedanta. But the way it's been unfolded to me by my coach is very much in line with Stoicism in terms of it's an existential experience. It's how I be changes the way I see. Mm-hmm. And I think that's very important for people like me, that my response mechanism in the world is the most important thing. And the way I respond then shapes my perception.
What are the signs for you? Like, what does that thought process look like when you realize that you're not in the best of place?
I loop. So what happens for me is I have an addiction to impulsive thoughts. And so that might mean it could be a subtle form of compulsive thinking or obsessive compulsiveness. Mm-hmm. But what will happen, and a previous close mate and colleague, he called it out. He goes, "Oh, you're looping again." I was like, oh, that's a really good way of calling it out, because what would happen is I would get a thought, and then I would hone in on that thought, and then I would reoccur on that thought, and I would drive everyone around me crazy. Right. And so that thought may be at the wrong place at the wrong time. It's random, it's impulsive, and then I chase that thought. So for me, when I start looping and becoming impulsive and compulsive with thought and reacting on them, that's when I know I'm off. When I'm okay is when the thoughts are coming and I almost picture it. Like when it comes in, I just let it rotate out. Right. But when I hook into these thoughts, That's when I know I'm feeling out of control somewhere in my life,
Mhm.
and my sense of control is now driving me to hook into everything I'm thinking.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and that's what I like to hear, that when we talk about everyone has their journey. Um, so what happens to you looks different than what happens to me. But at the end of the day, the result, if it's not, if something isn't done about it, is potentially the same thing. I don't think enough people realize that a ton of us are just on autopilot. We're on autopilot. We don't realize that connection. And I don't know if it's through that your spirituality. I mean, that's what a 12-step does. I've said this on here before, but I don't care. Everyone should go through 12-step. I don't care if you've never had an addiction issue. Because the second you really start to figure out why you do the things you do, accept the things that you've done, ask for forgiveness, and then trying to maintain these gains that you've made, this insight that you have. Find me a person that wouldn't benefit. So
Look, I would say to your audience, my audience, the key is triggering awareness and then staying on that bike. Right?
And that's all it is. That's what a 12-step is.
That's it.
However you find that, whether it's through a traditional, however that is, it's brutal honesty, setting a roadmap on to maybe these alarms go off when these demons start to form in your brain again, because they're going to. Some of us, like you and me, addicts, they're there probably all the time. Like it's a lot more, it's work, that maintenance project.
Maintenance project. Yeah.
It is. It's understanding that we're, acceptance. We're cut out of a different piece of wood, and that's okay. He says the same reason that you're doing what you're doing. You're a successful entrepreneur. It's the same reason you're successful in other areas of life before your most recent endeavors.
Yeah, that's right, brother. Yeah.
Yeah, I know we're coming in here on time, man, but honestly, I think we're scratching the surface on some things.
I think so too. I think we're gonna have to do a round 2, bro.
And I love the thought of when people are on paper, and I said this in the intro to my episode that's coming out tomorrow, when people, that if you look at this snapshot of where they are right now, they look like they've got it all together. They've got all of their stuff together. I imagine, around some very successful people in life. And yet that willingness to talk about the ugliness that is part of your story that's gotten you to the same place. There's more power in that than I think people realize, because it connects those people that haven't gotten there yet. And they go, oh, he's from my team. And look,
that's right. Yeah, that's right. And I think the other power too, on the back of this conversation, is that you take away the external way that we present ourselves. Behind that is the human experience and human condition, which we're all on the same ship. And, your story and my story, we were on the opposite end of the spectrum when it came to the law and everything we did. But the way that we felt, we were kindred. And I think that's what we need to realize, that as human beings, we're all presenting stuff, but underneath the hood, there's the same mechanisms and the same condition, and we're not as different as we think they are. And with that, there's a connection.
Yes, 100%. As humans, there's a connection. We are as complex as can be. We can put, things in a space. We can do amazing things, but at the same time, we're not that complicated. We're not that complicated. I'll let one last thing. I compared I don't even know if this is a good comparison, but how do we deal with stress and trauma? Some people are just going to deal with it better than others. Some people are going to grab whatever device gives them the dopamine that they need to feel okay for that short term. And that's looked at as a weakness by a lot of people, right? That's what we're taught to look at this as a weakness. And I was comparing it to altitude sickness, that some people biologically deal better with altitude than others. But if you go high enough, everyone is going to get altitude sickness. And you certainly wouldn't look at that, lowlander who got altitude sickness at 6,000, 7,000 feet and go, God, this guy's, he's weak. He's morally corrupt. And, when we can think about that, you can have a lot more empathy for other people. And maybe you can look at people in the streets a little bit different, and you can have a little more compassion. But that's just my soapbox on the way out.
No, I agree. And I would add that we also need to remember we all have our poison. That person we're judging for, being on the phone at dinner with his wife, and we're like, look at that dickhead, can't put the phone down. And then, 3 hours later, we leave our ass hanging out because we're drunk, right? We all have our poison. So
yeah.
Look, I really enjoyed this. I think we should look at this, maybe a habits corner, man.
I like it. I say we could even pick a habit for a quarter or and try it, and we can compare notes.
I agree.
Yeah, I think it'd be a lot of fun.
All right, brother. Well, look, you have a great evening there, right?
All right, man. You have a good day. I'll talk to you later.
See you, brother.